From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien looks ahead to the USDA's latest grain supply and demand report due out this morning. And he advises you grain producers to keep abreast of local grain basis trends instead of the volatility in the grain futures being generated by the China trade concerns during Dan's weekly segment on the grain market trends. Also, K-State's Jeff Whitworth reports that bird cherry oat aphids and winter grain mites are now active in winter wheat around Kansas. He offers his thoughts on whether or not you growers should take steps to control these. And, of course, we'll have K-State's Mary Knapp in to talk Kansas agricultural weather, along with more, here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today, our Friday edition. Thanks for tuning in. Well, no lack of subject matter for our grain market segment this week as we get together once again via phone with Dan O'Brien. He is a grain market economist for K-State Research and Extension based in northwest Kansas out of Colby. And Dan, we will, in a few moments, dwell on what you think that USDA grain supply and demand report will have to say here within the hour this morning. But the market's attention, last few days anyway, has been firmly fixed on the fate of U.S.-China trade relation. And that has, if nothing else, pumped volatility into these markets this week.
And when you say the market, normally when you and I talk about the market, we're talking about ag markets. But in this case, I think ag markets are just an extension of the broader stock market, broader equity markets, et cetera. So it sure seems like, even in light of changing supply-demand factors that are affecting the outlook for feed grain, oilseed, wheat production here in the U.S., that these broader macroeconomic, national, international issues that are being brought on by the U.S.-China trade negotiations are certainly affecting the willingness of any party at almost any level to take a long position. So whatever happens on that, we're too uncomfortably close a spectator in these back and forth public discussions, that are up and down and up and down. And even if there's a statement, either pro or con, that comes out, still you have to actually view that and see what verification procedures are in place to see over time how it all actually plays out. So these are sovereign nations dealing with very important economic issues that have long-run consequences for their growth, economic prosperity, and the welfare of their people. So, we're just in a volatile time, and so here we're talking about grain markets, but spending our time looking at how broader geopolitical issues are affecting all the broader commodity and financial markets, and acknowledging that, gosh, that's got the attention of everybody. So here we have a USDA report coming up, very important information, but a lot of the attention of that is getting really, quote, crowded out by this critically important issue of how trade and economic policies in both U.S. and China work out.
Before we get to the expectations for that USDA collection of numbers later on this morning, you make a point here amidst all of this price chaos caused by trade uncertainties that producers focus more on what's happening with local basis as they contemplate their marketing strategies.
I think all that much more we've got to look at that. The futures are being, apparently in the last month or so really driven by these broad macroeconomic issues, but yet we still have underlying supply-demand forces at work in local cash grain markets. Again, if you look at yesterday's USDA Ag Marketing Service reports for central and western Kansas, you see quite a bit of variation, really some pretty good basis levels for wheat, 10 under in Topeka and Salina, Hutchinson, Wichita, Wellington. Those are not bad basis bids at all. We have for corn positive basis bids in Atchison and Topeka, 20 under at Hutchinson. You go out to the west for corn, 10 under Sublette, 10 under Ulysses, a number of other places, 15 under or so. That'd be for corn. For grain sorghum, again running about 65 under for the best bids at major elevators in western Kansas. Central Kansas, though, you've got grain sorghum bid at 10 under. In Topeka, some others at 40, 50 under. Soybean bids in central Kansas, 65 under July. When I'm saying under, quote, we're talking about the July contracts. Basis bids still pretty wide out in western Kansas, $1.45, $1.30, something like that. When you bring the ethanol plants into it, we end up and have a cash corn bid at ethanol plants in Kansas at 5 to 20 cents over July. And that cash corn bid, the top end of the cash corn bids in Kansas in that 369 to 384 range, those are the top bids in the United States for ethanol plants. And grain sorghum have a bid in the Kansas ethanol complex, cash bids ranging from 30 to 15 under. So those are really good. Those are good bids relative to other general cash markets. So the point is, we have underlying demand going on, and regardless of what happens in these in the markets in response to these geopolitical issues, we still have to use grain, and grain still has to be pulled out of or enticed out of farmer storage for sale. So I guess I'd watch the basis all that much more, particularly when the broader futures markets are influenced by such non-strictly ag forces.
Well, then, what to expect, Dan, from the USDA's grain supply and demand numbers due out at the top of the hour? The general drift is that we have or will have ample supplies across the board. Well,
the May report, World Ag Supply Demand Estimates report, will be the first new crop, will contain the first new crop set of supply demand numbers and projections for the 2019-20 marketing year. But yet, except in the case of wheat, we won't have any NASS surveys actually out in the field giving us anything to work off of. Of course, we're still in the process of trying to plant the corn, grain, sorghum, and soybean and hard red spring wheat crops. So what we'll see, I think, in that report for new crop bids, I'd be completely and utterly surprised if they reflected anything of reduced plantings that the market and, frankly, farmers in some of the eastern Corn Belt states are wrestling with. So I think it'll be a steady-as-you-go, non-problem forecast for new crop. And on the old crop side, the slowdown that we've had in exports for these crops, it's probably going to be reflected in the USDA's reduction, by them reducing the export projections for, particularly for wheat, for soybeans, may happen for grain, sorghum. We'll see for corn. But, if all else being equal, if the USDA comes in and reduces the export projections, then it'll be raising ending stocks and, be somewhat negative for stocks to use, et cetera. Negative in terms of a little higher stocks to use. We'll see from there. I don't know if the USDA will change their price projections much, because we've had so much of these marketing years already done for the feed grains and oil seeds. So we'll see what happens. But I think we kind of come into this with expectations of not a lot of change in supply-demand balance sheets, except possibly for old crop that we'd see a little lower export numbers, a little higher ending stocks, which means that if there is something that happens that's not expected, that would be a positive. And really the question we have now, if we get some positive news out of the supply-demand estimates report, will the market pay any attention to it, right, given their hyper-focus on the trade issues? We should also mention that, there's weather risk with regard to the wheat crop. And again, we just had the Kansas wheat tour not too long ago. They came through our area here in western Kansas and, all across the state. The general idea was that, the crop looks great, it's behind. And things are pretty wet. We don't see lots of disease pressure yet, but we sure have a lot of moisture. So that issue is still out there. We have some pretty cold temperatures, at least in the western parts of the state. That's really, I'm kind of wandering into Mary Knapp's, her purview, but, we have some weather risk yet to deal with in the wheat crop, and that, if we did end up with some type of an issue, again, we've got so much wheat in the U.S., I don't know that you'd be looking at a major change in U.S. wheat supply-demand balance sheet estimates for the new crop marketing year, which will start June 1st for wheat. But still, it's something to deal with. And, if we did have some damage to the U.S. hard red winter wheat crop, then we'd have to account for that. The balance sheets could tighten things up a little bit. Still, the bigger issue with wheat is that, our exports are dragging for various reasons, and that puts an overall minus sign in front of just about any perspective we have for wheat until we can change that situation around.
All right. Well, next week we will discuss how the market responds to those numbers coming out from the USDA later this morning. We'll also have an updated handle on row crop planting progress, which is still very much in the balance and as far as where that's going to go here in the coming days. And we'll pick up on all of that next Friday. Dan, thanks and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He's a K-State Research and Extension grain market economist, Dan O'Brien, who joins us every week right here to talk grain market trends. And as always, Dan works up comprehensive notes on those trends and what's behind them, which he posts on the agmanager.info website. We'd refer you producers to that for more information, agmanager.info. When we return, input for you wheat producers on what to do about certain insects that are now showing up in Kansas wheat stands. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Well, through a number of our guests, we've been tracking the status of winter wheat stands around Kansas, but we've yet to address what, if any, insect troubles might be stirring out there in our winter wheat around the state. And joining us now to inform us that, in fact, there are a few things that may well catch the attention of you growers out there along that line, crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth, K-State Research and Extension. He's been scouting a few fields and talking with producers recently about the presence of insects in wheat fields. And, Jeff, you say there are a couple of noteworthy infestations out there, but that you wanted to be sure that growers fully understand their true threat to the crop and whether they deserve some form of response.
Yes, thank you for having me. We've had a strange year weather-wise this year, but you know what? I guess we did last year, too. We had a really cold April and a hot May, went right into that. And this year it seems like we're having a cold, wet April and May so far. So we have not had as many insect or arthropod problems as we normally do in wheat so far. I shouldn't
knock on wood.
Yeah, I shouldn't get too far ahead of us. But for the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing a lot of migration from the south. Anytime you get a southern breeze from aphids, primarily the bird cherry oat aphid. But there's also some green bugs and a few English aphids. But primarily the ones we're seeing and the ones I've been getting calls about is the bird cherry oat aphid. And that's if you're out looking in your wheat, they're really pretty easily seen right now because they're a dark color. To the unaided eye, they're kind of a dark grayish color. They'll be down in the canopy a little bit, so unless they're just an early migrant, and the early migrants will have wings. The ones that are blowing in have wings. Those are the adults. Wherever the wind blows them or they flutter a little bit, they will land, and they're all females. So they will start producing a little colony. So if they will crawl down into the plant a little bit towards the base of the plant. So if you're out looking, you want to pull up a few plants or pull the leaves back from a few plants and look for the little dark gray, blackish spots there. And those are probably going to be bird chariot aphids. There'll probably be a winged one and maybe 3 or 4 very small, tiny ones. Those are the nymphs. And they're all females. So as those female nymphs get larger and they become mature, they will produce more and more and more. And that's why aphids often can just explode very quickly because they're all females. They don't have to wait to look for a mate to mate. They don't have to wait to lay eggs for the eggs to hatch. They're just producing females, and those females produce females. So in a matter of 10 to 14 days, you can have a whole generation go through, depending upon the temperature.
And the numbers are great enough that they can inflict physical damage to the wheat stand.
They can. Bird chariot aphids will feed on grasses. This time of year, the only thing we worry about for the most part, again, is wheat because that's what's out there, right? Mm-hmm. But once the wheat dries down or senesces, they'll move to sorghum or corn. But normally, they're not enough of a problem on corn or sorghum to worry about. But wheat can be a different story, and they can be a problem in the fall, and they can be a problem, again, in the spring. This year we've got really good growing conditions. Normally, insects that suck the juice out of a plant cause more problems during times of stress, when they're drought stressed, the plants are competing for limited moisture, and then they get a sucking insect or a sucking mite or something in there. They're competing for that, so that can be a problem. This year we've had a lot of good moisture, probably maybe a little too much
to
in some
excess,
cases,
right.
But so they're not going to be a problem. But every year, and for the last couple of weeks, at least this year, I've noticed a lot of spray planes out spraying and some ground rigs, but it's been pretty muddy. So mostly the airplanes are flying, and mostly they're putting on a fungicide. So every year I get the call, hey, we're putting on an application of a fungicide. Is it worth it to put in an application of an insecticide to kill the aphids that are out there? Because, they notice the aphids. They're pretty readily visible with the green leaves and the dark gray background of the aphids. And you know what? They'll save application costs. I've gotten lots of calls that they can put on an application of an insecticide for an extra $1 an acre. That is really cheap. Now, I got to admit, that's a bargain, but it's not worth it. We just are not going to have any problems with the aphids that we have. And if you put out an insecticide right now, you're going to kill the aphids. But the problem is you're going to kill all the beneficials because these insecticides are general insecticides, so they're going to kill the lady beetles, they're going to kill the green lacewings, they're going to kill all the wasps, they're going to kill all the insects that are out there. And there's just not enough aphids to warrant that or justify even a $1 an acre increased cost in insecticide for the damage you're going to cause later on. So we do not recommend that. I mean, they're just not going to cause that much of a problem. Let them be out there. They're going to provide some food for the beneficials, and you may need the beneficials later on if we get sugarcane aphids, for instance, in, or if we get other aphids later on. The beneficials will be there, and you won't have taken care of them by spraying a not needed spray of insecticide in the wheat at this time.
So once again, if you identify bird cherry oat aphids out there, let them be, let them run their course. Do not respond with the treatment. It just isn't worth your time or the expense that might be involved. There's another pest out there, potentially, you say, though, Jeff, that earns attention as well, winter grain mites. And we talk about these frequently, sometimes throughout the season.
Winter grain mites are still around. That indicates to me we've had cool, wet weather, because they're normally, as the name implies, around during the cool part of the year when it's below 50 degrees. And, October, November, December, anytime in the winter or in the spring, usually in February and March, and usually they're more noticeable, again, if the wheat's water stressed or moisture stressed, because they're sucking the juice out of the plant. But the winter grain mites are still out there, and there are lots of them out there in these plants. But again, they're not going to cause a problem. As soon as we get temperatures up to 80 degrees, they're going to go away. They're going to estivate or hibernate or whatever you want to call it for the summer. They're going to over summer. They're not going to come back out until October or November. There's plenty of moisture right now, and they're just not going to cause a problem. I have gotten a couple of calls, what are these mites? A couple of people have misidentified them for other mites, but all the ones I've seen and have sent in are winter grain mites. They're a dark-colored mite with bright red legs. They're very distinctive. They're actually kind of a neat-looking little mite, and they're really not going to cause a problem. They're just going to go away here as soon as the temperatures straighten out and get more like mid to late May type temperatures, and they're not going to cause a problem. So again, yes, a miticide or insecticide will kill them, but you're also, again, you're going to kill all the beneficials, and it's just not worth it because they're just not going to cause that problem with the wheat that's out there right now.
All right. Well, we've a good month and likely much longer than that before wheat harvest starts rolling here in Kansas, given particularly the late development of wheat stands around the state. So any chance any other insect threats might emerge?
Well, there's one other one that I've gotten some calls and experienced myself, and that is buffalo gnats. Out in the field, when you're out sampling, monitoring, searching, whatever you call it right now, if there's any water around, and there's a lot of water around, the black flies or buffalo gnats are really pretty annoying. They fly around your face. They fly around your animals, dogs, cats, cows, horses, because they're looking for moisture. They have to have a blood meal in order to produce viable eggs. And, I'm getting a lot of calls from people that live in rural areas about how do you control these things, because they're really bad this year. And it's really difficult. The adults are only going to be around for 5 to 10 days, maybe. Okay, and it's just the females that are searching for a blood meal. Once they get satisfied, they'll go lay eggs. The problem is you can't really control where the larvae are because they generally lay eggs in moving water, slow-moving water. So you can't really spray a creek or a stream or something like that without killing a lot of other stuff. And there's really not much registered for control of these things because they're not that big a problem. They're just a nuisance. The nice thing, they don't carry any diseases, they don't transmit any pathogens, and they're only going to be around probably for 5 or 6 more days. But they are a nuisance, and, I was talking to a grower the other day, and there was just like a little cloud of black flies or buffalo gnats around him, so I left him. No, I'm just kidding. But they are really a nuisance right now. So normally they're out early in the morning, in the evening. If you're out during the day, they're not going to be as bad unless it's a cool, cloudy day, and then they'll still be out. Because remember, they have to have a blood meal. So they're going to find that blood someplace from you or an animal or something.
They're inconsequential to our standing crops, just an annoyance to
They are
us.
An annoyance.
Yeah. So take due note, but let them also expend their energies, and they'll go away likewise. It'll be soon when we have our row crops hopefully up and going, and we will definitely have insects at work in those stands as well, as we typically do in any growing season. So, Jeff, at that time, we'll have you back for an update on that front. Many thanks to you.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
He's with us regularly to talk about insect pressure in our field crops around Kansas, and this time focusing on what you might be seeing in your wheat stands, and in fact, the recommendation being that you don't need to take action against these. That's Jeff Whitworth. He's a crop insect specialist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more after these moments away. You're tuned to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, continuing on with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. And the lead story of the day, of course, President Trump did follow through and raised tariffs earlier today to 25% on $200 billion of Chinese products. China's Ministry of Commerce responded quickly that China would retaliate. In a round of early tweets, the president indicated he was ready to raise tariffs on $325 billion more of Chinese imports. The president also indicated he was willing to support $15 billion in additional trade aid payments to farmers as well. The president said that the talks with China continued in a very congenial manner, as he put it. There's absolutely no need to rush, as tariffs are now being paid to the U.S. by China on 25% of $250 billion worth of goods and products. These massive payments go directly to the Treasury of the U.S., read his tweet. And then he added, again, the process has begun to place additional tariffs at 25% on the remaining $325 billion. The U.S. only sells China approximately $100 billion of goods and products, a very big imbalance, read his tweet. Then he indicated that the billions of tariffs from China would go to buy agricultural products and ship those to poor countries in the form of humanitarian assistance. In the meantime, as his tweet read, we will continue to negotiate with China in the hopes that they do not again try to redo the deal. In yet another early tweet, the president maintained that the tariffs would generate wealth for the U.S., and he again said it would be good for U.S. farmers. Business groups and farm organizations tried yesterday to curb the possibility of the U.S. imposing those higher tariffs on China. Farmers and business groups have largely supported the Trump administration's push to demand China change some of its business practices. Businesses have complained about the intellectual property theft and forced transfer of technology. The tariffs, though, have reduced U.S. agricultural exports to China and have caused importers to pass along cost increases to buyers. China already has a 25% retaliatory tariff on various agricultural products, including soybeans. Some other products have even higher tariffs, such as pork, which has a 62% tariff imposed by China. There are signs that the trade war may be having one of the president's intended effects. Bloomberg reports that since December, the U.S. monthly trade deficit with China has declined by roughly $10 billion, according to the Commerce Department. Meantime, the USDA's secretary's upcoming visit to two other Asian nations includes dialogue with counterparts at the G20 Ag Ministers meeting. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
A full itinerary is planned for Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue over the weekend and into early next week as he visits Japan and South Korea. Most of the first days of the Secretary's Asian tour centers around the G20 Agriculture Ministers meeting in Japan, speeches and participation at various G20 seminars, and engagement with global counterparts on a variety of matters. Secretary Perdue is expected to continue to convey with Japanese officials the need for both nations of a U.S.-Japan ag trade deal of some sort, like he did a few weeks ago.
Maybe not a comprehensive type of bilateral trade negotiation, but certainly one that seals down the agricultural issues that we're very concerned about.
The South Korean leg of the Secretary's visit next week includes meetings with agriculture and food and drug ministers of that nation, respectively, and speaking at the Cotton Council International's annual Cotton Day event. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And the value of U.S. agricultural exports rose to $12 billion in the month of March, up $1.2 billion from February. However, imports hit a record $11.9 billion, as they rose nearly $2 billion from the February mark. That left just a $111 million trade surplus. That is the smallest since the U.S. registered an ag trade deficit of $46 million in May of 2017. Well, to forge the future of wheat crop genetics, researchers here at K-State are looking to the past. Here's more from Marcia Boswell on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
A team of Kansas State University wheat scientists are tapping into 10,000 years of evolution in wheat's genetic code as part of their continued efforts to understand how historic processes that shaped modern wheat can help to improve the varieties grown by today's farmers. The exhaustive study, which is published in Nature Genetics, involves sequencing the genomes of nearly 1,000 wheat lines collected from different parts of the world with different environments. The work was led by researchers from K-State and Agriculture Victoria of Australia. Edward Ockenoff, a K-State wheat geneticist, said we compared the genes against each other and looked for nucleotide base changes or mutations that distinguish one wheat accession from another. He noted that the researchers found more than 7 million differences in the genetic code of the 1,000 lines. Ockenoff said these differences can affect the function of genes that control various traits in wheat that helped it adapt to new growth conditions, such as withstanding drought and heat stresses, fighting off diseases, and yielding nutritious grain. The changes that occurred in the genetic code can tell researchers a history of each wheat accession. Ockenoff said when humans started spreading wheat from the site of its origin to other places, they brought it in contact with wild wheat, and wild ancestors accidentally began to interbreed with bred wheat. What happened then was that bred wheat inherited the genetic diversity that was present in the wild emmer wheat. According to K-State wheat breeder Alan Fritz, that process of one species sharing genes with another species is called gene flow, and it is key for explaining the genetic diversity of today's wheat varieties. Fritz said understanding gene flow between wild emmer and common wheat is more than just academically interesting. The importance of historical integration suggests that a more strategic use of wild emmer should have value for future wheat improvement. Fritz noted that K-State scientists have been using wild emmer in developing germplasm for new wheat varieties in projects funded by the Kansas Wheat Commission and the university's Wheat Genetics Resource Center. The work by Ockenoff and his research team allows breeders to evaluate the diversity in wild emmer and be intentional and strategic in how they employ desired traits in new wheat varieties. Fritz said, as we move forward, we can apply what has been learned here to focus future efforts on traits related to health and nutrition that wouldn't have been direct targets of historical selection. Ockenoff adds, for the first time, we have described how wild emmer's genetic diversity contributed to the development of bred wheat, and what it's done since humans domesticated wheat is it's helped to develop a better crop. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. It's been another active weather week around Kansas. We'll recap it with K-State's Mary Knapp next on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. We're back now on Agriculture Today, and returning to the guest chair is Research and Extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp, for her weekly stint on Kansas agricultural weather. And it's the flooding around Kansas and in multiple parts of the state, Mary, that has grabbed the headlines this week, and it's a serious situation for way too many people.
Right. Unfortunately, it's really kind of difficult to go through the map and narrow down exactly who isn't in flooding. It is very widely spread. Probably the epicenter is in south central and southeastern Kansas. It should be noted in southeastern Kansas, this is not a beginning of a flooding pattern. They've been experiencing floods for almost 4 weeks now in various parts. Probably the one notable one is the fact that the turnpike was closed for some time due to the flooding.
In the Sumner County.
In the Sumner County area as it was approaching into Oklahoma. There are a lot of secondary roads throughout central, southeastern Kansas that are impassable, which is creating problems. And you can even go further west and have some of these gravel and dirt roads that are slogging down. So even people with four-wheel drive vehicles are having difficulty negotiating them. There have been unconfirmed reports of 18 inches in Reno County. I have not found anything to validate that amount, but widespread areas of 8 inches of rain in that region. Manhattan, we're already at over 7 inches for the month of May, which puts us as the 19th wettest May on record when we still have over 2/3 of the month to finish off. So again, a very, very wet pattern with all of the attendant issues that come with that.
And in fact, there's so much of the state that's well above normal for this stage of May so far. And then if you look back over the spring, obviously, it's extraordinarily wet out there. Is going to remain so for some time.
Right. We should note that the Northwest and North Central were not as severely affected by that. They had been drier than normal. In fact, North Central Kansas is the only division that is still, even with the rains that we had this week, below average for the year to date. They're at 78% of normal. And again, that's after a week of almost 1.5 times what they would typically expect. So they've got some ground to make up. This will go a long way to do that. They have good subsoil moisture in that area, so having this surface moisture arrive will help drive that crop development in that area without the attendant flooding issues that are plaguing the rest of the state. There's also a pocket in north central Kansas, the Osborne Jewel area, that had not seen some of the heavier rains earlier in the spring, and so they also were welcoming some of that moisture to further along their winter wheat in particular, which is getting into that active stage. A lot of the wheat is getting into the grain fill, and having that moisture to connect to that subsoil moisture has been welcome.
But for the bulk of the state, complications abound. Row crop planting at a standstill. As you bring up, alfalfa first cutting is delayed and may be for some time. It's going to take a while to get out of this, Mary.
Right, and that is also the other issue has been that we've been running cooler than normal for our temperatures so far in May, which, coupled with the cloudy weather, has reduced any evaporative losses. So again, this has been slow to dry out. We are looking forward to some sunny, mild days over the weekend and in through maybe Thursday of next week. In fact, we are likely to be warmer than normal, which again will be welcome to get that start on drying down the soils. But there's a long way to go. One of the other issues is that the drainage system, the rivers and the creeks, are all full, and they're full downstream, so that's going to mean it's going to be slower for these stream levels and river levels to drop, which again will delay some of the drainage in some of the soils in the area, and that will be particularly tough in the southeast.
Well, at least a break is ahead. Before we look at the extended forecast, do want to note, overnight last night, it got flat cold in some parts of the state. There were worries about frost or freezing temperatures in particularly north central, northwest Kansas. And you say that folks can go online to the Mesnet website to confirm what happened there.
Right. What I would recommend is that producers check out our freeze monitor. You can get that under mesonet.ksu.edu. It will tell you how cold the temperatures dropped at the various Mesonet stations, and you can also use the handy tool to see for how long were those temperatures below that freezing mark. Keep in mind that these are measured at the Mesonet station. Low-lying areas are likely to see even colder temperatures as that cool air will drain down into those regions.
Mesonet.ksu.edu to look into that. So a few days of open weather ahead, very welcome, but then as we look into the following weekend and slightly beyond, back to rain, you say.
Right. The 6 to 10 day outlook, which carries us through next week, calls for warmer than normal temperatures and a slight chance for wetter than normal. It looks like that is going to be at the end of the period, so Thursday, Friday next week. When you look at the Climate Prediction Center's hazard outlook, they have a bullseye over the central plains of a moderate chance for heavy precipitation. So not just wetter than normal, but some heavy amounts with that, which is not what we need at this time. And the area outlined in this covers southern Nebraska all the way through northern Texas. And again, we do not need above normal moisture, particularly in the central and eastern third of the state.
That's looking ahead to the weekend following this coming weekend. So when we get back together next Friday, Mary, we'll get an update on the prospect of that heavy rainfall returning and the rest of the weather outlook.
Yes, and we will look at what the outlook holds for the summer, because we should have the updated 3-month outlook for June, July, and August, which should be available next Friday.
Excellent. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric.
Research and Extension climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp. We thank you for being along with us, and do enjoy your weekend as well. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.